All right, welcome everybody. This is the CMAS Advanced STR session. We're doing it a little bit different this year. My name's Jeff Braw, and we have a few people in the room with us here. We have our audience is Mark Real and Michael Calleros. We have Thomas Stacy, who will be helping us manage the chat as we go through this webinar. Our ARE representative is Mackenzie Lane, and then Sam Garza is the trainer who's coaching me so that I keep on track and we do this the right way. So we are moving into the CMAS season. This training is called the Advanced Training. What we did this year is we are going to cover content that is more around troubleshooting. The other content, there is some content that I'll be moving over very quickly, but it's content that I believe most all of you who are in this session have seen before in previous years. So I'm going to call out the differences that you need to really be aware of, and some important information, but I'll move quickly through some of the content. And then we also at midpoint will be taking attendance. So if you are following this link through the Google slide presentation, please wait until that time until I signal you to take attendance. That if you do want to follow along with the slides that did come out in the email that you got, and also to join to this live stream that we're doing. As we go into this, I want you to please all acknowledge that you're in the presentation in the chat room, so we know that you're there in that place, and then also when we get to the attendance. Do we have any questions moving into this? I'm going to turn to Thomas, and so if you have any questions, please type that in the chat. Thomas, are you seeing anything?
For questions, no. Pretty much everyone's just saying hello right now.
Okay.
Jill says she's at a computer without speakers, unfortunately. Jill Spivey at TJ.
Okay.
So she's working on finding headphones. Otherwise, everyone's just saying hello right now.
Okay. All right. Well, so I've this Google presentation, or these Google slides, will also be linked to from our STR wiki that covers the CMAS and Park presentation. So if you need to pass back to it, you can either do so through the link we sent or through that wiki. All right. So I'm going to start. Right now I'm on slide 3, and this is just the overview of what we're going to cover. In this session, we're going to be covering the timeline, the SAL and STR relationship. Please note that I will speed through that fairly quickly. And we do have Mackenzie Lane here from ARE, so if you have any questions, please be sure to ask them while we're going through that section. Then we're going to talk about the technology readiness, the device setup, a readiness and a survey, a checklist and survey. Of course, troubleshooting, that's where we're going to spend most of our time in the presentation, and information around the SRF, or student response files, and the log files. At the very end, there's some information about accommodations that we'll go over also very quickly. So moving into slide 4, I believe you all know that this CMAS means the Colorado Academic Standards, or the measure of them. There are actually 2 sections that we'll be testing in: the CMAS Science and Social Studies, and then also the CMAS English and Language Arts section with math, and so that's considered the Park session. The testing window will be March 14th through April 29th. So there's only one window. It does have 2 different sections though in the window. Mackenzie, do you have anything to add to that right now? Okay. All right. So in slide 5, it shows more about the exacts of the testing calendar. The math for grades 3 through 9 will be March 13th through April 28th, as well as the English Language Arts for grades 3 through 9. The Colorado Spanish Language Arts, or the CSLA, for the identified English language learners is in that same window. The science window is an optional testing window, and schools that are in that window will know. You can please talk to your SAL, and that's for 11th grade only. So that window begins in April, and it's a short window, April 3rd through 21st. Then the science portion for grades 5, 8, and 11 will be in April 10th through April 28th, and social studies for grades 4 through 7, only at selected schools, is April 10th through April 28th. There is a link at the bottom of this screen. It takes you to a onlineassessment.dpsk12.org, and that's where we got this information from. Do I have any questions so far, Thomas?
Let me double check. So David Doyle, probably jumping ahead, but how many sessions do we need to plan for in all at an elementary school? That sounds to me like something that they would want to talk to their SAL about.
So David's question is, how many sessions should they plan for? And
in elementary school.
so Mackenzie's going to chat and answer that question.
It says I have to create a channel.
So click over here. We had to no, click actually over.
Mackenzie, are you?
Keep going.
Make sure you log in as your googlemail.dpsk12.net account. So while she's working on that, I'm going to move to the next slide, which is slide 6. So as we move into the January timeline, you can see February 1st is tomorrow, and we're in the training part of it. You guys, the STRs and the SALs, are going through their training. One thing highlighted in yellow, you'll note that the SALs are getting their access to Pearson Access Next tomorrow, February 1st, and then after that they'll provide you with your access, and so please don't expect that until after February 1st. With that, I want to also note that you'll be doing things such as looking and confirming at the total number of testing devices and the auxiliary equipment that will be involved in that: headphones, keyboards, and mice for the mobile devices. And so then the testing schedule is going to be finalized with your SAL, and there is a deadline for that for February 10th. And so we expect that your SAL will be coordinating with you guys, because it also depends on your number of testing devices to see what your testing capacity can be. Did you get you in now and you're able to answer that question? Okay, so moving into slide 7. This in the month of February, there's going to be more preparation about we're asking you guys to focus on the devices and how they will be receiving the app, the Pearson TestNav app. And the SAL's going to be doing their pieces around training for the staff. There is a survey that we will ask you or the SAL to sign off on by March 1st, and this survey will help us to know your level of preparedness. Your principals will be able to know this, and so this link is in this presentation, but we'll also have it in an email out to you guys that will help summarize all these things that you need to help make it more convenient, so you'll get to these links. And then in March, we expect that most likely there will be an infrastructure trial taking place in March after the devices are prepared. You know, there's a lot of things that have to be done to get up to that point, and so that's what we expect. That if your building does do an infrastructure trial, or I'll call it a dress rehearsal, that'll be more in the March timeframe. So in March and April, this slide is about how the testing materials will be delivered to the schools. So I won't spend too much time on that, but it will be, well, for ELA and mathematics, the park section, March 6th is when those, that week, the materials will show up. And then for the science and social studies, it'll be the week of April 3rd. And then moving into April, there will be things about the items that will take place around closing out the CMAS testing. That will be mostly your SALS roles, and then the devices will be returning back to normal classroom use for learning. So beginning in slide 11, I'm talking about the SAL and the STR relationship. I'm going to just focus on mostly what you guys will be working on. So in slide 12, we're asking the STRs to attend the training, to work with your administrators, to be checking on the devices. Of course, our DoTS techs will be part of that and assisting with you in that. We are also working on reports that we can generate through our new device management team, so it can help. Those reports will help identify the devices that did not get the updates, so we don't have to focus on all the devices, but just the ones that that are not receiving the pushes automatically. During testing, you guys will be the troubleshooting on-site troubleshooting person. We do have DoTS techs that can rush to help with things, but there's just not enough to be in all the buildings at all the times, like you guys are. Moving to slide 13, that just talks about what to do to prepare before the day of testing. A lot of that is about preparing the devices, making sure there's the ability to keep devices charged in the testing area if it's out of their normal storage area, and then making sure all those extra devices, such as keyboard and mice, headphones, I'm going to say, we do say microphones here, but that's extremely rare, that they're accessible by the test administrator. And then we have a recommendation to have one set per classroom. We've talked about this in the previous years. That's in case one setup fails and the students are beginning the test, it's easy to move them over to a new device. The SALs will need to print the student authorization tickets, so that computer that gets set up will most likely come through you guys, so you'll be setting up so that it's just ensuring the SAL can print from the device that they, most likely a computer, so they can print from there to get the authorization tickets that the students use to sign into TestNav. In slide 14, there's a couple things I want to call out. The infrastructure trial we would strongly recommend, and that's sort of a dress rehearsal. The next thing that the light bulb is next to is developing a system to track devices when they're on loan out to the device that the student works on. It would be something like the cart number and device number for that cart, and now these can actually be written on the testing ticket. Later on I'll have a slide that shows what it looks like. So that is allowed now, so that way the student can jot down, or the SAL or the test administrator, what device the student is testing on. So if for any reason we have to go after that device to get the student response file because it's not uploading correctly, it will be easy to locate quickly. The other important thing on this slide is to make sure that you sign the security agreement and submit it to your SAL. There's content they have in a PowerPoint that you can go through, so you'll know what that entails. And we would say that mostly you need to consider the test material when it's open and on the devices. It's treated as if it's a piece of paper, something we would not copy or take a picture of. But as soon as the student logs out of the device, it's no longer a secure content on that device. So that's the thing I'd like to emphasize here. Any questions, Thomas?
We have a couple of questions about the different sessions and session types, and Mackenzie already clarified that social studies is only at select schools this year.
Okay.
And then the other question we had is from Adam Smith. He was wondering about if there was any updates for the TestNav app, which I did. He was specifically asking on Windows and Chromebooks platforms.
Okay.
I let him know that the app has been pushed, is still being pushed, and is consistently getting pushed for LANDesk for Windows PCs. And
Okay.
Chromebooks, if there was an app update, which I'm unsure of, it should have already been set up from the Google console as well.
Yeah, so later, the question particular about the app being pushed to the devices, when we talk about device setup, we'll talk about how those are being pushed. But for the most part, for all but the Macintosh computers, all the other devices should be reliably receiving an update pushed through our automated systems.
But also, don't we have a link anyway to
Um,
download that?
Yeah, so Mark's asking, is there a link to download? And yes, there is a link to download if it's not happening like we expect it to. But we really hope that we can rely on the automation. That way, it's doing the work for us rather than everybody else.
And rather than us having to touch every device or most devices.
In the past, depending on the computer cards, the wireless, they usually just send out a link so that we have it.
Right, there's different reasons why
It would.
the device isn't communicating with the network, and so in those special situations, forcing the upload or download or push is what we'd need to do. So during testing, slide 15 is around just your role in being available to support any technology issues. So your principal should know that you need to be available and make sure that they're not booking you in other things, but they're allowing you to be solely available for the testing window. And then most like what we envision, a lot of times you're walking around the building like your Sal is, and you're in communication with each other and moving to a room if there's something that needs to be troubleshooted. And then we will be using our wiki and our email list to broadcast problems out or to communicate with you all, and like you all are very good at using that to communicate with us when you see problems. That will be that's one of our best channels at this point to for those lines of communications. So in slide 16, talking about after testing, so devices can be returned back to regular instruction. When the students log out, they no longer be considered that they need to be a secure device. That the test content either is removed when they submit to Pearson, or even if it is not, it will become an invalid file that Pearson will not accept. And then, so slide 17 just talks about the key is collaboration. That's one of the words we speak about most in DPS at this point, and so that just kind of shows the relationship you guys have with your Sal site assessment leader, that you're both working together very closely to ensure this gets pulled off well. And I would say in the past couple years it has gone very well, and we expect to see this year go well also. So in slide 18, we're in talking about technology readiness. The devices involved in our DPS run schools are laptops, desktops, Chromebooks, and iPads. There also could be mice with the laptops. If the important thing is what the students are used to while they're learning, that's what they would be using while they're testing also. If they use mice while they're learning, they should use mice while they're testing. iPads will require a keyboard as they have in the past. Headphones are required for all students taking the CMAS language arts portion, and that will be when the only time they should hear sound. Headphones could also be required during an accommodation that is text-to-speech. Your Sal will know who is set up for text-to-speech, so they can build a list so that you can, the test administrator should be aware also, and you can make sure the headphones are available for that. Proctor caching, we have it here in the list of devices because it's an important appliance, I would say, for the testing process, but we have set it up for all the schools that are on our district DPS network, or we call them district-run schools. Charters will be the ones who will need to set up their Proctor caching servers, so this should not apply to anyone, I believe, that that's listening to this this presentation today. Another component of testing is the TestNav desktop app, which has made our lives all so much easier. There is a web app. We'll talk about that later, but it should be almost never needed to be used. You should think about electrical outlets or a charging system to be in the area of where testing is taking place. And so we want to note that headphones with a microphone are not needed for CMAS. So that's something we've had a lot of questions about in the past, and so just to strongly help you know that they're not required, they're not needed. Any questions, Thomas?
The only question that I got recently that we haven't already answered is Christina Halfer, I believe at Ellis, is asking, do some students need headphones with microphones for accommodations?
Okay, so there was a question about what I just said last, or probably before I said it, but headphones with microphones should almost not be needed.
Yeah.
If it is, it's maybe for 1 or 2 students in DPS.
There's no speaking in any of the tests unless the student has a speech-to-text accommodation, and that would require a separate device, not necessarily headphone with microphone.
Okay, so concerning the headphones with microphones, if you didn't hear it, Mackenzie said that there is no accommodation that there's nothing in the test that would require a microphone unless a student has a special accommodation where they would need to do speech to text. In that situation, it's a very controlled environment, and the device that the speech to text happens on is not actually their testing device. It's a device that is off to the side, and it's students who are normally used to learning this way, and
SAL would know, and the special ed team would know.
yeah, and so the SAL and the special ed team are aware of this student, and we also are getting, as far as DoTS goes, we're asking ARE to give us that list of students who would require this so we can proactively reach out to you and make sure things are working as expected. But in that scenario, the student is using speech to text on a device where the test is not actually taking place on, and someone involved with administering the test is transcribing their answer into TestNav on the TestNav device. So TestNav does not have any special feature that we have to worry about where we have to turn this on, or driver, or anything like that.
Denise asked, quick question, if we test in the morning but not in the afternoon on any given day, can the students use the computers for classes in the afternoon if they are being used the next day?
Okay,
for testing?
so the question is around, I believe I would say the test being, the device being used for testing and then being returned to instruction within the same day or the next day, and we'll cover a little bit about that later. There's a big change that allows iPads to quickly switch that wasn't there last year. So then this means that all devices can be, once they're logged out of TestNav, they can be returned back to instruction immediately. So that's exciting news this year. Okay, so in slide 19, this section I'm going to begin talking about device setup. There's a few caveats that I want to cover first. First of all, in slide 20, we're looking at the software requirements. And so when we talk about the installable app, it's like a little mini program that is installed onto the computers. The requirements, all of our devices, except for iOS devices and Mac devices, should meet these requirements. All of our Chrome books should be on OS 55 or higher. That's what we're OS 50 or higher. But the trend is we're seeing that now. Right now, they're mostly at 55. Most of them are receiving that. We'll run reports so we can tell which ones aren't getting that. On the iOS or the iPad devices, they have to be on either iOS 9.3.2 or 10.2 or higher. And then for the Mac OS, it has to be on OS 10.9 or between 10.9 and 10.11. The Sierra 10.12 is problematic and not yet fully supported for the desktop app. And then Windows 10, 7 and 10 is also the supported operating systems, which are on, should be on all of our devices as we've moved away from Windows XP. Browser requirements, there's a big change here. Now, the only browser that's supported if we have to use the web app is Firefox ESR 45. That should be on a very small number of computers. So even though I have that content in these slides, it almost affects no students in the district because we want to drive everyone towards using the desktop installable app. That or IE11, that's what the browser would require. That's only in special cases do we think the browser would be used. In slide 21, you'll see that this talks about the what I just spoke of earlier. The only thing is that Java is, I didn't comment on it before, Java is something we have to deal with if we're using the web browser, but we expect that most everyone will be using the desktop app, so Java will not be an issue like it had been in past years. Slide 22, I just focus on what devices DoTS supports, and we recommend, or we have in our environment, and that's the OSs that I spoke of earlier. I do want to say, if you do go out on the web, there's a lot of literature on TestNav and Pearson and CMAS, and they do talk about the other supported OSs are Android and Ubuntu and Linux, which we do not yet have supported in our DPS environment. Slide 23 is just a link to the STR Wiki. If you do go to the wiki and then you search for CMAS, you'll find a article on CMAS and PARC, and that's where all the content for what we're talking about device setup is kept also. So just a few dependencies before we start talking about device setup. So in slide 25, the Mac and Windows computers, we want to see the consistency that the Mac computers use an account called testing as a local account. The Windows computers will use a Active Directory account to log in called CMAS. That is so we know that student response file or any log file will always be in the same place on a computer if we have to go to the computer and get it. It also makes it much easier for the students to get into the test because they don't have to run any settings or updates. That's already taken care of through the preparation that we do. Also, these accounts are set up to save a backup of the student response file onto a network drive. I'm going to talk about that in slide 26. So the student response file is a file that collects the information of the answers that the student is answering, and then it gets submitted to Pearson while periodically while they're going through the test. They have a safety net where a copy of that student response file is being saved on a network drive. in case something goes wrong with the device, then the backup file can be used to submit to Pearson. iPads and Chromebooks don't have that backup share like Windows and Macintosh computers do, so answers are submitted every 3, and so if the student switches devices, we may see that they lose a few answers. Scheduling guidelines is make sure that you don't go beyond 30, scheduling 30 students in a area when you're using wireless devices, because they need to access the most local the WAP, which there's a wireless access point in every classroom, and so if we overload that, it will start jumping over to the next WAP over, and we just want to make sure the wireless team recommends or warns, or they strongly want us to keep to that 30 device, no more than 30 devices in a testing environment in a classroom. Slide 28 just shows the system requirements, the hardware requirements. All of our devices do meet the recommended or minimum amount of memory, which is recommended is 4 gigabytes, minimum is 2. And then, of course, the screen size has to be 9.5 or higher, so all of our iOS iPads meet that requirement in our Chromebooks. And then the things that we want to make sure is that there is a minimum of 512 for Windows devices, 512 megabytes of RAM, but we know that we have removed almost all of those devices out of the district. So the only concern would be if you've accepted donations that we're not aware of, and the donations don't meet these requirements. Okay, so in slide 29, I'm going to begin talking about the Macintosh setup first. Slide 30, it's important, like I said, there's a local account that should be named testing. The password to get into that local account is testing. This account is built into our image. If you image a computer from Deploy Studio, it would have this account built into it. If for some reason a computer doesn't have that account, there are links that link to the instructions here and also on the wiki. And when we go into that link, let me log in there. Let's see, what do I do, Sam, to make this get a little bit bigger? I have directions that I put up here and I don't quite show. Waiting screen? No, document.
Oh, no. Go back to it. Yeah.
All right.
You might have to switch the size. Click on the document. Yeah, click on here.
Okay.
No, not right click. Yeah, just click on it.
All right.
See, it looks like it's pretty large.
All right.
Yeah, so.
Okay, so I think maybe this, I'm sorry, I'm trying to show this document. This kind of shows the content I need you to see, which is, there we go. You would log into our DPS NASO 1 share and download a couple of items, a script, 3 different scripts, one called TestNav account, one called TestNav mount, and one called TestNav 1.5.2 DMG, and then you can put them on a drive if you need to go to more than one computer. And then you run those scripts and that installer in the sequence in the document, and that helps bring the testing account to be set up on those computers if you have to do it manually. So that's a brief description of how that goes. And then you would create a shortcut to the app on the desktop for that, for the TestNav. There's instructions here about if we need to set up the web app. I'm not going to focus on those too much because it only is required when students need a special input device, such as a screen reader or a refreshable braille input device, like for someone who is blind, and they use in their learning they also use that device to input into the computer. The desktop app does not yet work with those devices, so in that particular case, then we'd have to use the web app. And if the web app is set up, we have to go through the pop-ups and how they look. All the settings that for you, I would think most of you as advanced STRs had to do this a few years ago when we had to before we had the desktop app, and we had to go through all these different prompts to make the web app work correctly. So concerning the desktop app, there's a new feature. Before we used to use a username and password to log in and check to make sure it was configured correctly. Now they have an app check feature that if you click on the little person in the upper right hand corner, there's an app check item, and so when you click on that, this is kind of what the screen looks like. You get you'll run it, and then you get that it was run successfully in my screen, my next screen, screen 33. It shows you what it's like. So once you launch it, you get a prompt that says run app check, and right, the configuration identifier, we are working to get our particular configuration identifier. I don't think that needs to deter you guys from running and checking the app check. It'll once we get that number, we'll be able to just check that the Proctor Cache server configuration is working correctly. But you guys would do run app check, and then you get a success success message that the kiosk mode and connectivity to the TestNav server passed. So that's that's the way you'll verify that it's working correctly on your devices. Now, any questions on that, Thomas? Any questions popping up?
Everything that has popped up, I've been answering as we go.
Okay.
So far, so.
Okay. All right. Now I'm moving into the Windows setup, slide 34. So on our Windows machines, as you all maybe remember, in the past few years, we used an Active Directory account with the username as CMAS and the password as CMAS. LAN desk, as long as the LAN desk agent is on our computers, it's pushing the newest TestNav app out to the computers and a continual push. So if you reimage a computer within a few hours, it should get the latest TestNav app. So when you log in with that username and password, it will launch TestNav in kiosk mode, so the students are at the screen and they can't go anywhere else but log into TestNav. If there's, I hate to dwell on the web app as much as I am, but if for any reason that particular computer needs to use the web app because of that input device I talked about earlier, you just close out you close out of TestNav, and then you bring you to the desktop, and then the Firefox browser shortcut to our version of testing, the co.testnav.com, will be there to click on. But if a computer has to have that, you have to run through the pop-ups that I talked about. So in slide 36, showing just a similar thing, that the app check is also in the Windows version of TestNav. In slide 37, it shows the prompt that you go to when you run app check, and it looks just like the Mac. So they're very consistent with that. In slide 38, I'm talking about why we would use the web app, and again, it would just be about for that particular small number of students that use the accommodation we talked about. And the next screens go through what it looks like when you're addressing all the pop-ups. And so once you get to TestNav, you'd run, once you get to the browser, you run systemcheck.co.testnav and click Start. Then the pop-ups start coming up. You click through them. You want to allow and then run. That's kind of a theme. And then you'll get to the system check, and then you'll click Start, and then it will run and give you the success that it passed. So these next two screens kind of show the difference between Mac OS and Windows OS. And then if you need to verify it with the web app, you log in as username is username and password is password. Click sign in and start test now, and then it should show that it works correctly. But I'm going to ask you guys again, I'm talking way too much about what I don't want you to focus on, which is we want to focus on the desktop app, not the web app. It's just we know that it is something that we might run into that we have to address. So in slide 44, we're looking at the Chromebook setup. Chromebooks are the easiest device to use for testing. We push out the web or the app to the Chromebooks, and it's just like it has been in the past. Students do not log into the Chromebooks. They go to the app section in the bottom toolbar. They pick TestNav. If prompted, they need to choose a customer. They'll pick Colorado, and then they're ready to sign in with their username and password. The app check feature is available on the Chromebooks. We will probably do that on a few of them to spot check to make sure they're receiving, that the app is working correctly and they've got the most current version of TestNav. What I can tell you, when we tested for Gifted and Talented in the August and September timeframe, that required TestNav, and it's the version that we use now. So all of our devices have most likely been receiving the current version for months. Now for iPads, for those schools that use them, there's a big change that we're excited about, and I think you guys should be too. The iPad, when I get to it, it has no longer needs to have a profile applied to it like in the past year. We'd apply a profile and then it would lock it into kiosk mode, and then with that, our single use mode, and then the iPad was locked into used for testing and not instruction for the duration until we unapplied that profile. In the new change, you'll see you just launch it and it asks you to allow it to be in single use mode, and then it's there, and then when they sign out it loses the single use mode, and then it can go right back to instruction. I'm excited about it. I jumped the gun. That's in the next slide, but so what I need to talk about first is the system requirements. What I need to discuss is the memory. So the 4 GB is recommended, but the minimum is 512. We see that any iPad 2s are most likely the ones that have the 512 minimum, the megabytes, and so in a moment I'll talk about why that can be a problem. But please remember on the iPads that an external wired keyboard is still what we stick to in DPS. So in my next slide 48, this talks about so we're pushing through AirWatch the new app out to the iPads. When it gets launched, it will there will be a prompt to allow a microphone and to allow app self-lock prompt. So you're going to click yes to those. When that happens, then TestNav will bring them to the login screen, and the student will log in and the device will be locked into testing mode. So this will be much easier than it had been in previous years. I need to talk about the iPad 2s because they're supported this year, but there are some caveats. the memory that I talked about, the 512 megabytes, falls below the standard recommended memory for testing devices for Pearson. So it's at the very edge of how a device will perform. So in two cases, we see that they will probably be problematic in performing. One is if they use an accommodation, text-to-speech or American Sign Language, that puts more content on the device and it stresses out the memory. So in those cases, if you know a student that needs those accommodations, work with your SAL and work to have them on a device different than an iPad 2. And then also, if the science simulations need to be used on the device, they also stress the memory out. So if they're testing for science, the preferred method is to move them to a device other than iPad 2. So that's where we might see some performance degradation. Moving on, in slide 49, important things we want you to know is that we want to track the Chromebooks and iPads and even the mobile devices, so that if we have to go after the SRF file, we want to, you need to work with that test ticket and that place to label that, so that if for any reason the SRF file has to be taken off of the device, it's easy to find. And then Java, if we have to deal with Java, they released one in January. Another release will be in April. That will not affect the desktop app, so it only affects us if we're using the web app. So that's other reasons we want to stay away from using the web app. Then there is an ethics training required, so work with your SAL to make sure you go through that content. You probably have, being advanced STRs, you've probably already gone through it several times, so you guys already know about this, so I really don't need to dwell much on it, but your SAL is the resource for that training. Now in slide 50, like last year, there is a easy checkoff list that you can click on the link to get to, and it's sort of a cheat sheet on how you get the devices ready. And then there's another survey that principals would expect that would be filled out by March 1st. It's the Google survey that's linked in this slide. And when you click on this survey, I'm going to just look at it. It is, you guys may see this as familiar from last year. When you're in this survey, you'll list your school name, and then building and STR name, and then when you click next, you'll be your SAL name, and next, then you'll be prompted to kind of give a quick survey about what devices you'll probably be testing on. We ask for this information because it helps us know how to best support you. So when you fill this out, that helps us to know, and and this is to help signal that you believe all your devices are working well, or you need some help too. So that's how that survey looks. Then now we're at the point where we want to take attendance. Sam is going to put this link up in the YouTube channel.
In the video description.
In the video description, so you can click on it. If you're in the Google slide presentation, you can also click on it from there. If you're away from any of the devices and just listening, please know it's tinyurl.com, and it's STRCMAS attend. So tinyurl.com/STRCMAS attend. That's all one word. So I'm going to give you all a moment to do that. I know you signed up in SchoolNet. When we go to show that you attended, that will help you with your PD credit, professional development credits. This particular URL helps me with as far as the stipend goes and tracking the stipend and how we report that to payroll services. Any questions, Thomas, that we need to bring up?
So Heather asked if text-to-speech is going to be using the browser-based app.
Text-to-speech is built into the desktop app, so that's something we don't have to worry about. We just use the desktop app, as well as there's a section where I will go over accommodations, but there's text-to-speech, and then there's also
Like
the visual
screen reader and
Well-
the braille.
well, that is yeah, that those are accommodations, but built within TestNav, there's the text-to-speech, American Sign Language, and also a zoom in feature, so they can zoom in to see things.
The other question I just got was Amy asked, will any operating system apps for Chromebooks be pushed out during the testing window this year? Basically, she's wondering if we're blocking the OS updates during the window.
So the question is, are we going to be blocking OS updates during the window? And in the past, we have not, because a lot of times those OS updates are important for other learning apps. So we've not found that they interfere. We'll only do that if Pearson puts out a bulletin that we must do that. But the problem, they have been good about supporting the latest Chrome OS, and the other learning apps sometimes need those latest Chrome OSs to perform right. So it's a difficult line to follow to make sure we're staying in balance so everything works. Okay, so now I'm going to move on. It's 5:20, and we'll be getting into what I call the advanced content shortly. And that is the technology readiness and troubleshooting. And so slide 53, it's like when things go wrong, we say the words we need to say for a moment under our breath, and then we realign ourselves, and we go working towards a solution. So we know they will, that we have our hotlines. They like they were last year. We'll show those numbers, but those will be the numbers to call for the things that are network issues or test device issues that just can't be solved. And then when Pearson Access needs to reinstate tests when students exit too early, we see that happen from time to time when there's problems with the test session and then the student response file. We'll probably be focusing a lot on the student response file in the next few slides. There is this EWS system called Early Warning System. And so this is the system that detects when the student response file isn't exactly where TestNav expects it to be. This year we're hoping to train you all better on how to handle that, to get that file to submit correctly, so we don't have to go through the routines we've gone through in the past where we retrieve them, we have to send them to Pearson to get them revalidated, then get them back on a device and attached to the student. So this error message that we see 1005 is one of the common early warning system error messages. When the student logs in, the student the test can't really find the SRF file that it's expecting to see there. This would be because they might have moved devices, because of a network, the device stopped communicating with the network, or the battery went dead and the previous file on the other device didn't get uploaded, and because the device wasn't connected to the network. It's not putting it up on our backup share. So they get into the test on a new device, and they get this prompt. It's looking for the file. Skipping upload is it depends on where the student is at in the test. If they've answered a lot of answers on the other device, we may not want them to have to go through all those answers. So skipping upload wouldn't be the best solution at this time. We'd want to probably find a way to get the SRF file off the other device, and then put it on this device and browse to it. If the student is if they did skip upload and they started the test and they realized, I don't see my answers, I was on question 12 and this is on question 1, then that starts a new student response file, which invalidates the previous one. So then when we go after it, we have to send it to Pearson so that they will revalidate it, and then we go through this screen again and we browse to the file once it's on the device. So that's what we're hoping, that we can get everyone more familiar with how these work, so that we don't have to go through that this much, and that you guys have a better understanding, because I know you guys are all brilliant and that you're all pretty good about solving problems if you have all the right tools, and I know you'd rather have the right tools and solve the problems. So that's kind of the scenario on how this happens. So in slide 55, so the student responses, the file is a combination of the ID, and a session token, the student response file. So when they log in, and the system either starts creating a student response file, or if the system knows that one has been building and it knows what it should be looking for and it can't find it. So when students get kicked out, when they're out of a test without finishing it, they have to be resumed, and so your SAL and test administrator are trained on how to resume a test, and so when the test is resumed and then the student logs in, it's going to look for the SRF file it expects to see. So when we deal with SRF files, you have to realize that if they test it on a Chromebook or an iPad, that file cannot be reconnected back to the student on those devices. It has the SRF file has to be taken off of those devices and then moved over to a Chromebook, a Mac OS or a Windows computer to be able to browse to it. So that's important to know. We just can't do this on the Mac, on the Chrome or iPads devices. Last year we were going to tell you something different, so I'll bring that up in a minute. But concerning the SRF files and moving them, this is more of a rare issue. I bet most all of you probably ran into it a couple times in your building in the last year, but out of 50 students that tested, we only had like 500 that ended up having this issue, where we had to get involved in recovering the SRF file. Some of you may have been pretty smart and already figured this out and were able to help make it happen without us knowing. But to help everyone get on the same level, that's why we're going through this content. So if there's a sign that the student response file is not sending the answers to Pearson, is in the Pearson Access test administrator dashboard. They can look at students, and they often do, to see where their progress is on the test. And so if it's not showing progress in that, and we see that the student's moving along in the test, then most likely something has gone wrong and the device is not connecting to the network to submit the answers. In the past, we probably would have told you to just move the student to a new device. I would say if they just started the test and they have only answered one question or so, then that might be the best path. But if they're well into the test and they've had constructed answers and typing, and it took them a lot of effort. At that point, we really want to get the student response file to go up to Pearson with the easiest path possible. So the things that we'd want to look for is the device communicating on the network. Oftentimes that little wireless, switch might get bumped on the side, and that might keep the device from connecting. It could be the fact that in the area it's in, the WAP, the wireless access point, got saturated and they somehow lost the connection, so you have to move the device to a different part of the building. Remember, you have to be careful about the content. It's a secure device if the student's logged in, and we don't want to let other people see that content. But you might have to force the student out of the test, start the device, get it back so it's communicating with the network. Then on the same device the student had the problem, you want to get them to log into it. So TestNav will look for the student response file, or you can browse to it if it's prompting you to. That way we would get TestNav accepting the student response file through the network connection, and then the test administrator dashboard should show that the device that the answers were submitted. So that's the best case scenario when something like that happens. If that doesn't happen that way, then we might have to intervene more with the student response file. Things that would have to happen is you would need to locate the student response file on that device. Later I'll show you where it is. The test administrator would have to resume the student in the test, and then the SRF file would need to be taken to another device and downloaded onto it, and then again have the student log in, or the cell might log in, because they're not answering questions. You're just worrying about connecting the student to the SRF file, and then they might have to browse to it. Now, if it turns out that there's something really wrong and the SRF file was never found, and the student is upset and they're like, I've answered 12 questions, then this becomes a test irregularity. So it has to be reported to ARE, and then we all would try to get involved in getting that student response file. That's where it's important that the cart number and the device number are kept track of, so it's easy to get to locate the device that probably had the SRF file on it. So that's where, at this point, we would probably, with your assistance, or you guys may actually take that SRF file off and contact Pearson, work with Pearson support to. We were emailing them back and forth, and then Pearson works with the file and sends it back. This screen talks about the error codes. So we look at the error codes to kind of help us know what might have gone wrong. Students sometimes don't use their right username and password to log in, so verifying all those things are right. The network connection, needs to be verified. Swap the device out. That's a last resort. If the student has been testing, we think there are several answers on there, and then again we'd verify. These are all our normal troubleshooting things, that the TestNav 8 app is correct, and then it's okay to skip in that screen if the student's just in the sample questions. In this next slide, slide 60, it shows what what we've already discussed, what the error message might look like. And so if you need to find the SRF file, you browse to the users folder for Windows, the CMAS user that we created, and then Pearson. That's a folder in their home drive where the SRF file is. It also could be on the secondary backup, but if the device hasn't been communicating on there, it most likely is not. It probably was just saving it onto the local device. So for Macintosh computers, to browse to it, it's similar. It's the hard drive and then the users folder, then the testing, that's the login that we asked you all to make, that local testing account, and then the Pearson folder. That's where those are. So if you need to browse, that's how you browse, and then you'd find it. The response file name, which is in the error message, should match where you're browsing to. If you can't find that file, then we're in trouble. Okay. So once we do find it, if it's all full success, like I've spoken of earlier, the test proctor resumes them back in the test. The file, they log in, the test nav may find the file, or it may prompt you to browse. So I'm going to skip past slide 61. In slide 62, it shows what the new testing tickets look like. So they're going to have a line on there that says, it says local testing device, but that's the new thing that allows us to write on what device they're testing on. So depending on how you train the test administrators, they might do it, or they might have the student write it down. So slide 63 just talks about if there's disruptions, if there's a fire alarm, or if the students have to leave, or something, they get sick or whatever, when they leave the test, they should choose the option to sign out and then click save and return later, and then exit the test. If they don't, if they choose the other option to exit the test and submit it, then that becomes a problem, because that has to get the state involved, because the student, generally we want the student to finish the test, and the state has to okay that and allow Pearson to let it be resumed. And then the other screen talks about what they do, what the test administrator would do to get the test working. Let's see what's going on here.
So do we use our credentials to resume the test for the student?
The question in the room is, do we use our credentials to resume the test for the student?
Right.
So the test administrator signs in with the login that the SAL gives them,
Okay.
and then they navigate to the session,
Okay.
and then in the session you pick the section, and then you find the student, and you'd see what status they're in, because they might be, there's a submitted status, that's where if they didn't, the state has to fix them, so they just go into exited, and then you can select resume.
Okay.
And then when you select resume, then the student can use their testing credentials to log into TestNav and resume and then begin testing from there. So your answer, Mr. C, is that you use your test administrator credentials for the Pearson Access
Got it.
dashboard to take care of that. So slide 65 just shows what it looks like when the student is going to submit. So that when they're done and they get to the end, they can review their answers. Then they have the option to select submit final answers at the end of the section, and they click yes, submit final answers. And there's a warning that you're gonna submit it. So it seems like if they're getting to that place where we get a lot of reports where students got exited out of the test, and they feel strongly that they didn't do anything to submit, that their answers got submitted and they did not see all these screens. When those things happen, we have to go after a log file. And the log file is something we scrutiny and Pearson looks through to figure out what went wrong. And so the log files are found in that same Pearson folder that the student response file is. They're just different folder names. So this screen kind of shows the reason it's here is just to help us. These are the things the student has to go to exit, and when they report that they're in submitted status and yet they didn't get there, I just want to show you how complicated it is for them to get there, because it's complicated. Next slide is in 66. So troubleshooting, I think you guys know this, but we just have to say it. So when there's a problem happening in a room, it's important to look at, is it just one student that's having a problem, or is it many? So when we get to that place where it's many and we start seeing that the devices aren't connecting to the network, then then it's hopefully we can remedy the network connection, which the network team monitors the network very closely, and they get warnings when wireless access points aren't working right, and they are on it, and they'll have a high visibility during the testing window. But if these are the things that would happen, is the testing would probably be paused until we figure out the issue, and then it would become a test irregularity. So the test administrators are told to note that there was a disruption, and then we go through our troubleshooting procedures, and then we get to the place where the test is resumed. So our goal is to have almost this happen, not at all, but we know sometimes things happen that we just can't explain, and we have to go through this routine. On slide 67, there are some troubleshooting resource links. There's the troubleshooting slide, which pretty much I just showed you, that we got from, that was their wording. The error code link is here, how test administration happens. And then the potential scenarios, I'm going to show you a few for the early warning system, just to help you guys be aware of all the different ones there are, but the most common ones that we'll see. One thing I do note in this screen for Pearson Access Next, we always get asked this question, and I want to make sure it was here, is what browser can staff use to use the test administrator dashboard? So even though TestNav is limited to certain things, Java and things, the test administrator dashboard doesn't require Java. It's a web browser that they use to get to it, and all these different browsers are supported: Safari, IE11, IE10, Firefox 45, and even the Chrome browser. And then so the operating systems are in line with what we support, what devices are in your buildings. Any questions, Thomas?
So, let's see. The primary question that I think it would be good for you to answer is Denise Santasivan asked, if a student signs out, do they have to continue on the same device?
Okay, so if a student signs out and the test answers are submitted, and we see that in the dashboard, they can move to a different device. If they have to leave the test before they've submitted their answers.
In the middle of the session.
Yeah. The key to know if it's okay to move on to a different device is, were their answers received in the Pearson Access Test Administrator dashboard? If it agree, like they see 8 answers, 8 of the questions were answered, and it looks like that's what the student, was on, and they are submitted, then it actually deletes that student response file off the device anyway. So then it's fine for them to move on to a new device. It's only when the devices are not, the answers aren't showing up in the dashboard like they should be. So now we're just going to again focus some more on the student response file and log files. The screen shows what I showed earlier is where you find those on the Windows and Mac computers. Of course, we've got Chrome OS and iOS, so we'll get into those too. So on the iOS, on your iPad, if you need to get to a student response file, the new way and the most convenient way, which is way different from last year, because that was the second method about the USB cable and all that, and using iTunes. We don't have to use that like we did before. So if you need to get to the SRF file on an iPad, you would use Safari on the iPad, and then you navigate to the URL testnav:2/admin. And so you might get a prompt about opening it, but then in here you can view the logs or the student responses, and from the screen you can then view it, and you would use email to get it from the device to the device you're going to use to work to upload it on, such as a Mac computer, or your device where you use the USB drive method to download it onto there and then move it to the device you're going to use to upload it. Now, so that SRF file is linked to the credentials the student used to log in, so that's why it's considered encrypted, and so it's safe to email. But I wouldn't email it out to a parent or something, then that would be outside of, because you guys are going to go through the ethics course and you're going to sign the agreement, and so you would keep the content within the DPS school system. You won't, you wouldn't, you would treat it as a secure test material, and then delete it, when you're done with it. Or if it gets submitted, TestNav will delete it automatically. For the Chromebooks, to get into the TestNav, it's very interesting. It's pretty similar. You launch TestNav, and when you're at the login screen, you hit Control-Shift-Z, and then you get a File Viewer menu, and in that press it again if you don't see the file viewer. You don't log into TestNav, but then you use a memory stick, and you can follow the screen prompts to download the SRF onto the memory stick. Now, as we spoken earlier, remember you cannot use the Chromebook or iOS device to upload an SRF file. It has to be done through a Windows or a Macintosh computer. So in slide 73, this just shows some common error messages that you see. And the first one, 1002 and 1003, is all about it's not finding its connection to the places where it would save the file. And so that, to me, that would the first thing we look at is what is the device connecting to the network? Are they using the right login to log into the device? Meaning app mode, for Chromebooks, the app on the iOS, they're not using a browser on the iOS device. On the Mac and Windows computers, using those logins, the CMAS and the testing login that we talked about. In screen 74, it's the error code 1001 and 1005. So the student will log in, and then they'll get a message that says Proctor, click here, and then when they do, that takes you to that screen. I know this is kind of tiny, but so this is where this is what it looks like, that prompts you to go through the process of finding the right SRF file. In 75, 1001 and 1006 are concerning content filters. We should not expect that we would see any content filters blocking, but if this comes up, this is something we'll address immediately, because we would expect it would be affecting everybody. Again, then 1001 and 1007, this particular one is about the fact that you may have found the SRF file, but it's saying it can't use it because it's no longer valid. And so in that case, the outdated token means most likely the student had been testing on one device, there was the problem that took place, and then they got moved to a new device, and so it started a new student response file, and so that made the old response file no longer valid. So that outdated token is a key of that they were testing on two different devices. So in this case, we'd have to get Pearson involved and to revalidate the file.
So it's better if we just encourage them to keep using the same machine.
Yeah, that would be why,
Yeah.
right, when we see that it's like they've moved along pretty far on the test,
Mhm.
we don't want them to start testing on a new machine, because then it could invalidate the file that has, you know, the 10 to 12 answers, and then maybe even a long constructed paragraph,
Mhm.
you know.
Mhm.
So that's to avoid that outdating the token. We want to keep them on that same device until we can get it to submit, or move the file to a new device. If it just won't connect anymore, something really went wrong with the wireless card or something, then we would get that file on the new device, and they wouldn't start testing until we've, you know, I mean, they'd be through the screens, browse to it and connect them to that, and then they'd be able to move on. And then let's see, the last one is like error 1008, where the files were saved, but they couldn't be submitted to the server. So that's another indication, something about the device isn't connecting with the network. And so in that point, that would be an indication of, like you just talked about, Mr. C, the fact that we don't want to put them on a new device that's connecting on the server without getting the student response file over to the new device. Thank you for bearing with me through all those. I know that's a lot of content. So now on slide 78, I'm talking about the support contact information. This is similar to previous years. Prior to CMAS testing, you contact ARE for administration support through their 33736 number, or for technology support, you contact the DoTS hotline through the 33888 number. But once we move into the testing window on March 14th, then the hotline will be up and running, the CMAS hotline. So it's 720-423-CMAS or 2627, and that number, that will give a priority call to the either DoTS support or ARE support to address the situation as quickly as we can. If you do contact CMAS support about, like, for the revalidation of a SRF file, there's two different numbers. There's the ELA and mathematics number, and then there's the science and social studies numbers. You would find these at Pearson Access Next also, but then you can use the chat if you need to, which is handy, because the chat last year they invested a lot in the chat support and making it very speedy and quick. So if you do contact Pearson, it would mostly, you contact Pearson, like test administrators, they can get support on how to navigate through Pearson Access Next or to the training site, or managing registration data or setting up test sessions. They will assist in all that. The other support, for technology support, we want you to contact the CMAS hotline, because it's our DoTS network and it's different than what their support might know, and we could help you through we can get the support needed quickly there, then that they'll be able to. Have any questions, Thomas? Or
So there's two questions. So let's see. Mark Davenport specifically asks, under what scenario would you want to pull the SRF file from an iPad? Because his schools are going to be testing with iPads.
on what scenario? Okay, so the question is, on what particular scenario would it be to get students pulling the SRF from an iPad? And so that would be more about if the device for some reason stops connecting to the network and submitting the answers up to Pearson. If the student is, like I've talked, far along in the test, and switching them to a new device would not connect them back to their answers, that's when we would work to get the student response file off of the device they were testing on and onto the new device. Or actually, in the iPad world, you would not put it onto another iPad. Through the SAL, you would get it to a Windows or Macintosh computer. It's through a USB drive, actually transferring it, then through coordinating through the SAL, logging into the device and browsing to the place where you uploaded the SRF file to get the student connected back to their answers. Then after that, you could exit out of the test and they could resume on another iPad, and they should then now be at the last answer they knew when they were done. So it's mostly about when the device can no longer, something goes wrong and it's not talking to the network like it should be.
Right.
You could also troubleshoot the device to get it connecting to the network also. But I know iPads are fairly reliable. It might be moving it to a different area of the building so it connects to a WAP and then submits the answers.
Right. The other question I have from Michael Kimball at DSA, he asks, is there a slide to show how to import an SRF file to another testing device? And I said the best slide I saw was 76 as far as on the presentation itself.
Well, it's a process, so it takes a little bit of time. So let me go back to, so in 76, so the question from Michael Kimball is, what would be the best slide to describe that? And even though I don't have one slide that does it, if you can look at the slide that shows where you navigate to find the student response file for whatever device you're working with, upload it to the USB device, bring it to the computer you're going to use to get the SRF connected back to the student. So you save it preferably in the user folder for that CMAS or testing. You may log in as yourself, with your administrative rights, and then save that file into that, and then log back in as the testing or the CMAS login. And then at the screen when they log in as the student, you'll either be prompted to browse, and then you browse to that folder where it's at, or it may actually go and look in that folder to see if it finds the SRF and potentially just pull it, and you may never see the browse screen prompted.
Right.
And the next thing would be to have the test administrator look in the dashboard and look at the answers received by the student and confirm that they did upload more answers. Okay. So now, starting slide 83, I'm going to talk more about accommodations and what we see in technology around them. On slide 83, so accommodations, the SAL coordinates all of the setting up of the accommodations, but it's always based on the fact that they have an IEP or a 504 plan or they're an English language learner. The SAL is the one that has the master list, so it would help you know if you need to be concerned about any of the accommodations. Some accommodations will be paper-based, so the SAL will have a test administrator that's trained on how to administer it through paper-based, and it won't even go through the technology. And then, like we've talked earlier, there's a very small population of students, or I'll say computers, that serve those students where the web app is used. And that's generally if they have a special device that, like a refreshable braille. We say screen reader, but screen reader, we actually learning more, it's more about screen reader is something that's usually on another device and it reads the text to the student. in a different way than text-to-speech does. And so, but in the extreme about an accommodation, that's when we use the web app. In slide 84, it shows all the different variations on accommodations. There is the English oral script, and then there's assistive technology that helps with that. That's actually a where someone may be reading the script to the student rather than the device reading the script. There's in that particular case, they get extended time. There's a Spanish audio, which is speech to text, where it reads the text as Spanish. That's an accommodation that's actually within TestNav, so we don't have to worry about the web app. It's the installable desktop app. There's a Spanish oral script. Again, that's where somebody actually speaks the questions to the student. There is a color contrast and around written responses within the device, and so that's an accommodation that TestNav works with. It's not something you manually can set the device to, and then TestNav ends up having that feature within it. Then there's a word-to-word dictionary, which is speech to text. That is a particular accommodation where students will need a headphone because they can select for the device to read. Wait, I'm sorry, I said that backwards. Speech to text is the particular one where somebody the student is speaking their response, and they're speaking it on a different device than they're testing on, and as the response is constructed by the student, somebody else types it in to TestNav for the student. Yeah, and my next screen 85 is very busy, and I think what I really want you to know out of that is the Firefox ESR version, 32-bit, has to be used in that particular area, and that could be headphone or earphones or earbuds requirements. That's the different units that need text to speech will use those. Those will have to be in place. Now I'm going to move on from that. So, and in this screen 86, is talking about text to speech. And so what I really need to say about that is some schools just assigned that accommodation to all their students, even though it didn't apply. And so your SAL will be trained on exactly using that when they should. So unless you're the SAL, you wouldn't need to worry about it. I know that some of you STRs are SALs, but at first when we started using CMAS, sometimes schools would just blanketly assign that so it would be available for students, but it really it is bandwidth intensive, and it is it uses memory. It's memory intensive, so it doesn't need to be applied to every student. Slide 87 is if there is a text-to-speech or a Spanish accommodation where they're going to be using headphones, you just have to be aware that the students have to adjust the volume before they sign in to TestNav, because once they sign in, they no longer have the ability to adjust the volume. And sometimes, we've mistaken the fact that the test wasn't, giving off the, they were supposed to be hearing things and they weren't. It wasn't because the test wasn't performing properly. It was the fact that the volume has to be addressed prior to they sign in. The text-to-speech, the slide 88 just kind of shows what it looks like, that they have a little bar on the side where they can click to hear, and they have a little play button. And then there will be a progress. This shows it's important to address the volume control. And now in slide 90, this is some link to the practice tests, which are found at pearsonaccessnext.com. So there's different variations on practice tests. So that's where you can, if your teachers ask you where they can go to find these, it's at pearsonaccessnext.com, and there's a section for that.
One of the things I've found is it seems like if they're doing it, their browser, whatever browser they're using, must meet the requirements for the test now, the browser-based test.
So Thomas brings up the fact that when you're using the practice tests, you're not actually using the TestNav desktop app. You're using the browser to use that. So you might be prompted for some of them use Java, but some of them don't. So there's different prompts, but the browser would have to be looked at prior to the practice test. There is when we talk about the infrastructure trial, they use practice questions. So, and there's a training version, but that piece all has to be set up as if they were setting up test sessions in Pearson Access Next. But that's also another way to address students getting familiar with the content is through the training, having your SAL set up a training site, training sessions. But in that, the desktop app works just like it would for the test, and they use Colorado as the site. And like last year at the very beginning, the state told us to start use the training site, or the park training site, and then it switched midstream while we were in the testing in that window, and so then it turned over to just using Colorado. So a few schools were affected, but this year we use so the SAL uses the training site to create the sessions, but TestNav uses the Colorado customer to apply those logins, so we don't have to worry about selecting a different customer.
How many practice tests should they have?
The question is, how many practice tests should they have? I think isn't there's a law about how much students can there's a law about how much assessment time they have versus instruction. So the practice test, I would think, would just balance out, not taking too much time away from instruction, but getting them familiar with the content so they're comfortable when they go into the test, that they know how to navigate. And
with like the format of the question, some of the different tools for the math and the science or things like that.
Because if there's anxiety, I think students who feel more comfortable with the content, then the anxiety drops down, and that would be good. So in slide 91, I'm talking about the infrastructure trial. And so slide 92, what is the infrastructure trial? And we just talk about it. It's really like a dress rehearsal. The SAL will go into the training site and create student logins that are not tied to any student. They're just practice logins, and then they assign the content, and then when you go into your infrastructure trial, they use those test the test tickets. The ticket that has the login that they use to log in for the test, and the test administrator has also a connection so they can log into the dashboard and see how they monitor the progress of those testing logins. And so everyone just walks through the motions and they get familiar with how it works. It's more like a dress rehearsal, and so that way when testing begins, students are comfortable logging in. The test administrator is comfortable using the dashboard. So that's the reason to use it, and it also helps you identify that all the devices are working correctly. That's our buy-in on that. So in slide 93, it talks about all the things that I just talked about, how it helps everybody know how to use the different tools. So the timeline, we would see that if you can, because the devices have to be looked at, the earliest you probably can start an infrastructure trial is February 8th, you know, but you'd want to complete it prior to the time students start testing. We had a question in the new STR where they said, well, we're not really beginning our testing because they only had to worry about science and social studies, or they didn't have to test as many students, so they could start later in the window, so they could actually do their infrastructure trial after the testing window begins, because they wouldn't be actually testing for a few weeks. So that's that is allowable. If you're going to do a trial and you want, we ask you to inform us, and you use the online assess at dpsk12.org. This way, they can provide, ARE can provide you with a guide on how to do it. And then, so that's the end of the infrastructure trial. Do you have any other questions about that, Thomas?
Specifically, Stacy and Jeremy, Stacy Nishioka at Bradley and Jeremy Collins Teller were asking, any idea what the law time limit actually is? And Heather put that wasn't sure what they were asking, and Heather said they mean for the practice tests, and that's what they said yes to. To the best of my knowledge, there's no recommendation for how much time they spend with the practice tests.
And so the question is, do you have to worry about a time constraint or what time allowed for the practice test? And no, you don't have to. You know, I mean, you could just go through the point where students log in, answer 1 or 2 questions, exit, you know, and everyone kind of understands how you exit, right? And that's all that's needed. So there's no required, you know, guidelines under than going through at least the complete set of motions, to logging in, maybe answering a question, and exiting the test. Moving into slide 96 around.
The other question I got was from Michael Kimball, and he asked for infrastructure tests. Are all students involved?
There's different. So the question was, are all students involved in infrastructure tests? And so there's different variations on how you can do it. You can do an infrastructure test and only involve your staff, where the staff practice logging in as a student, and you don't involve the students. Or you go to the next level where you involve the students, but you just do minimal, you know. Or you might go to the next level where students use the practice test as a way to get familiar with all the different types of content displayed in CMAS. So the requirements aren't as stringent as once you go into the test. It's just we try to promote the benefits of getting everybody familiar with how it all works.
Jeanette Barla was asking, for infrastructure trials, do they use the Colorado customer, or the training customer this year?
Yeah, so the question is, what customer do they use for the infrastructure trial? And so it is the Colorado customer. Even though the training site is used to create the logins, the Colorado site uses those logins. So it's much easier than it was in previous years, because in previous years we'd use a different site for the trial
and then go back and
then
switch.
Yeah, and so that was a great improvement. So in slide 96 and 97, I talk about proctor caching. And so what you guys mostly need to know is that we set it up for all it's set up through the network for all DPS run schools that are on the DPS network. It's a system that caches the test content, so that when the students log into the devices, it goes to the proctor cache server to pull the content through our network onto the devices. And so it minimizes the amount of internet bandwidth we need to go, so that, if streaming is going on in your building for instruction, using a lot of internet bandwidth, the CMAS is not using a lot of internet bandwidth. It's just using our bandwidth within our network, which is very high, and it goes directly to appliance within our network. The only bandwidth then to the internet that that TestNav uses is when they log in. It goes out to the Pearson server, which directs them to our Proctor caching server, and then when they submit the tests, the answers go directly through our network out through the internet to Pearson access. So if you look at any literature, or your SAL does, that's outside of ours, and they talk a lot about setting up the Proctor cache server, you just know this and inform them that you do not need to set that up or worry about that within our network. And we've used our system for the last 4 years, and it's worked very well. In slide 96, it just kind of shows, 98, what it looks like when you have a Proctor cache server versus when you don't. And so that just kind of shows how what I described is that the TestNav devices go within our network to the server to pull down the content. Okay, so our last section, we're to our last section. You guys have been so patient. I know there's a lot of content. And this last section is about a test that's going on that is connected with CMAS, but it only affects a small number of students in our district, and that's called the dynamic learning mapping, or so and what it is, it's an alternative assessment that students that have certain needs, and I have on here like a cognitive disability, that probably is not the proper word, but that type of identified disability that they need to, that they will use this test instead of CMAS. So your SAL knows who they are, and so we only see a small, like less than half of our schools having students that take this test. And so this test, I'm going to go to the next screen. It can also be called KITE. And so if you look at any of the literature, we do not use a caching server for KITE or anything like that. KITE, so it has the client, which is usually the test administrator or the service provider, their computer, and so and then they have a portal that they go in, like CMAS, that they navigate to. So the devices that will use the KITE software, this is the software requirements, which is, they're always pretty much Windows or Mac computers. So Windows 7 or 10, or Mac 1010 or 1011. There is a Chromebook app available. If it turns out your building does need it, we'd coordinate through our mobile device management team to get that app onto your devices. But generally, it's almost always used on the service provider's computer. And here, the instructions on how to download it are here, but usually Karen Lutz sends those instructions to the service providers, and they actually, as long as they have the administrator rights, they download and install it and use it. So I won't dwell on that too much here.
I did get a question from
okay.
Douglas Bushnell at East, if there's an update to the KITE from last year.
So the question is there an update to the KITE from last year? And yes, there is. There's a new version, I think it's 3.0, and so it needs to, you have to reinstall it this year. So it will be needed to be installed or updated. If you need support through for the KITE during the testing, so there's before the testing window, like before, and then during the testing window. So the CMAS hotline during the testing window is where you would go to for support. And then prior to the testing window, there is, the DLM has a support desk, but usually DoTS can help install the software and work with it. So we're at slide 106, which says questions. I hope